The TEFLologists have written a book, Podcasting and Professional Development, a guide for English language teachers, details the emergence of the podcast as a tool for professional development, engagement, and personal investment, as well as providing a guide to setting up your own podcast. Featuring a foreword by Thomas Farrell, this is the first book written for language teachers hoping to make connections between the podcasting medium and their own professional development. Podcasting and Professional Development, a guide for English language teachers, is released by the independent publishing collective The Round, which has produced ebooks by Scott Thornbury, Nikki Hockley, Lindsay Clanfield, and many others. For a full list of titles, visit theround.com. Podcasting and Professional Development, a guide for English language teachers, is available on The Round and directly through Amazon, and all profits from sales will go back into producing the TEFLology Podcast. Pick up a copy and support the show.
Is there any relevance of native speaker norms? That's a question for TEFLologists. Is it better to focus on form or to focus on forms? That's a question for TEFLologists. If you use a textbook, is your classroom authentic, or should your approach be more learner-centric? From feedback to learner autonomy, we'll discuss it all on TEFLology.
I'm Matthew.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Matt.
And welcome back to the TEFLology Podcast, a podcast all about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters, presented by three self-certified TEFLologists.
TEFL News. Today's TEFL News is a story from the EL Gazette. The headline is, English language teachers in Ireland have intensified their campaign against unfair working conditions. So, this is something we've kind of touched on a little bit before, and it's something that's widespread throughout the industry, but unfair working conditions. So, what do you think constitutes unfair working conditions in this case?
Pay.
Contracts, length of contracts.
What do you mean by length of contracts?
I mean, being like schools that maybe have the power to let teachers go at any time with very little notice.
Getting benefits as well. You know, like some companies don't give benefits. You know, it depends.
On what basis, though?
Like, it depends on the amount of... So, in Japan, for example, some companies will only count your teaching hours as your working hours, but they won't... So that means that they don't have to pay you company-based benefits.
Yes.
That kind of thing.
And that's exactly the point. So the protest that's talked about in the story was in Dublin, and the teachers, or the people involved, were protesting against bogus self-employment, which is, it sounds from the description in the article, very much like the situation in Japan, where schools will say, like in Japan, to qualify for benefits and pension and that kind of thing, you have to work over 30 hours a week. And what they do is they say, you teach a maximum of 29.5 hours.
Yeah. And
it's nonsense, because you have to be at school, and then they say you've got 15 minutes to do all your planning, and then and they don't count the rest of the time.
But this is very similar to the thing that they've been talking about with Uber recently, right?
Gig economy,
where like Uber, where they don't actually employ anyone. You're all self-employed, and you're working as a contractor. Is that the right term?
Yeah.
So they don't have to pay any sort of benefits to the workers or like employment insurance. They just kind of say
Yeah. But I think so the question is it that they actually are classified as that kind of worker, or are they being wrongly classified as that kind of worker?
Right. So people are being misled.
Yeah. So here it says teachers at some English language schools are wrongly classified as self-employed. A situation whereby the teacher becomes a freelance worker, invoicing the school at the end of the month. The organiser said, the worker is responsible for their own taxes and is significantly disadvantaged in respect of sick pay, holiday pay, maternity or paternity pay, unemployment benefits and pension entitlements.
Sorry, just to quickly ask, what kind of schools?
These are language schools.
Language schools.
Yeah, like private language schools, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, this is something that I think is happening in a lot of different countries. Why do you think this affects, or this seems to affect language teachers? I mean, obviously in Japan it's affected language teachers for a long time because the eikaiwa industry, the English conversation school industry, is built around this assumption. And in fact, when I was working at an eikaiwa years ago, whenever the teachers brought this up, the management said, well, you can either have your jobs now without the benefits, or we can give you the benefits and half you will lose your jobs because we can't afford to pay them.
Yeah.
Yeah, in our current model.
I mean, I worked at a very small family-run language school in London for 6 years. And maybe for 4 of those years, I was the director of studies. So I was on a contract.
Right.
I had an annual salary, basically. But all the teachers, and when I was a teacher as well, it may have been a very similar situation. It was just month by month.
Right.
And we had teachers who stayed there for 5, 6 years, and they never worried about their jobs because they were the teachers who were kind of at the top of the food chain.
Right.
But the newer teachers did, and they were right to, because in the fallow months we may not have enough students for them.
Right.
So but the school also operated on each week new students would come. At the end of each week, new students would leave, and we knew more or less in advance, several months in advance, how many students we'd have each week and how many teachers we needed. But we didn't know, 6 months ahead what was going to happen.
Right.
And we did have periods where the numbers dropped a lot. And I think the school just wouldn't have been able to operate if we had said, okay, 5 teachers, you're on a salary for this year. It just wouldn't work as a business.
So do you think that this is an unavoidable situation?
I don't know. I mean, possibly for schools with certain setup.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are schools that are, taking more than the management or the people at the top are taking more than their fair share in terms of what they pay the teacher. But I think a lot of schools are just following, kind of basic business practice.
Yeah. But this is, I mean, the point of the article is that this is not legitimate business practice.
Okay.
Which, I mean, I guess the argument in the other direction would be, if you can't run your business without exploiting your workers, then your business doesn't deserve to exist.
Yeah.
Could you not argue that the same way?
For example, at the school that I worked at in London, we were very open with all the teachers. They knew exactly what the situation was.
Right.
And some stayed for a very long time, and some didn't stay that long.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know. So to what extent did they have an option in that case?
Yeah.
Just because you're open with them and you say, look, this is the situation, doesn't mean that situation's okay. And just because the teachers accept it doesn't mean that it's okay because they accepted it. I mean, they may have had no other choice. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. School, I mean, I'm not sure how that works. Like, what do you mean by no other choice?
Well, if you have to work, and if all of the schools are doing the same dodgy practices, then you don't have much of an option. As a teacher, you don't have much recourse.
But what's so dodgy about it?
Well, in this case, it's being classified as being self-employed, which has a certain set of requirements, but those requirements aren't actually followed through. It's just the school's classifying you as self-employed so that they can mistreat you, in order for them to survive.
Right. I guess what I imagine the schools would argue is that if they didn't do that, the alternative would mean they would just lose money and they'd have to close.
Yeah, and then the argument would be, well, boo-hoo. Sorry. Can any other business...
But then all those teachers who don't have jobs anymore, they have no option. They have nowhere else to go, according to this idea. Yeah. But this idea that you say to them, this is what it entails. They know exactly what it is. They know exactly what the situation is. They go for it, and then they turn around. I mean, I'm not saying that's what's happening here. They may not have been given all the facts.
But do you think just being given all the facts means that your practices are legitimate? Like, if you give someone the facts and they accept the employment, does that mean that therefore everything's fine?
But I'm sure in those cases that the schools also know that this isn't the schools I'm sure would say, or someone would say, we wish we could pay you more. We wish we could give you better benefits. To survive as a school, we can. And you can say, boo-hoo, oh, this poor school has to close. Right. No sympathy for the owners of the school.
I'm not saying no sympathy.
But then if there's no school, then there's really nowhere for those teachers to go.
Right. So, and again, I don't have all the answers.
Right.
But, I mean, I don't buy the argument as well that just because people have signed up for it, therefore that means that it's fine. because I think that there's other forces. People have to work and they have to take jobs. I mean, it's probably a larger economic issue that we can't really solve without socialism. But
So would one option be for the schools to be a bit more open and just say this might happen, this might not? Not saying if you sign up for it.
I mean, I would always tell teachers too, like, treat us the way we treat you. If you get a better offer somewhere else,
right.
Give us as much notice as you can, but if you give me 1 day notice, I understand.
I think...
And the teachers would do that.
Yeah, I think certainly being open is a good point. I mean, the complaint here is teachers being wrongly classified, and that's the complaint in Japan as well. Teachers are classified as part-time workers when it's a full-time job. And here the schools can't make the argument that, that they need to do this to survive, because they keep opening new branches. Right? So,
Sure.
So I think in that case it is just exploiting people.
Yeah, it certainly happens. So then it seems like the issue then is the laws or the rules that exist that those schools are exploiting. Those are the things that need to change.
Yeah, but also, I mean, like the laws, like in Japan, again, the laws exist. The schools are just finding loopholes and ways around them. And they can always do that. They can always do it. The point is enforcing the laws by investigating what's going on. So it's incumbent on law enforcement to get involved with that. Which
is why in Japan, I think they have had some, big successes and some, failures and stuff, but the language teaching unions, the main one, they do spend a lot of time fighting against those practices. And occasionally, like I said, do affect change.
Yeah, so is there any mention of unions with regards to Ireland?
Yes, this protest was organised by a union, which was Unite, the union Unite.
Oh, okay.
I believe.
So there.
Yeah, and again, this was complaining against practice. I mean, I think there are bigger concerns in terms of in the case we've been talking about. Even if this situation is technically legal, I think you can still argue that there are illegitimacies involved with the way it's kind of set up. But again,
just because something's a law doesn't mean it's a good law.
Right,
There's
exactly.
plenty of bad laws, of course.
Yeah. So I think that this is something it's kind of an issue all over the world. And I think that it's kind of complicated, but certainly where there are things like legal systems in place which are supposed to stop this kind of thing, then it is good for unions like Unite in this case, or the Japanese labour unions, to actually enforce the conditions that are supposedly part of the contract. So that's this week's TEFL news, all about unfair working conditions in Irish ELT. TEFL cultures.
For this episode's TEFL culture, is that what I'm doing? TEFL culture is this. Well, I have to admit, I prepared this as a news section, and then realised halfway through that I'm not doing news this week.
Okay.
But it's still a culture. It's still very cultural.
That's a peek behind the curtain, listeners. We're incredible professionals.
But this came about, for me at least, as a result of a retweeted article on Twitter that I saw earlier this week. And it concerns the recent debate, recent in the sense of this year it's come back around. The recent debate taking place about the myth and misguidedness of learning styles or sensory modalities, but more commonly known as learning styles. For example, we all know the VAC, the visual, auditory and kinesthetic learners. So I'll go through my bit first, and then we can talk about it afterwards, if that's okay.
Okay, what do you mean by your bit?
My bit that I'm about to read, don't interrupt. That's what I want to say.
Okay, you're chomping at the bit to get through.
Okay.
Champion.
So
shut up. It's Babelfish.
Is that from last week or this week?
It was last week.
Okay, right, okay.
Threads through the episodes.
Callbacks. So in an online Guardian article written by Sally Wheel in March, it claimed that tailoring teaching around individual learning styles does not achieve better results, and that this approach should be abandoned. Now, this is not her saying that; she's just reporting this story.
Okay.
But this came about, this report, because a group of up to 30 academics, including Professor Paul Howard-Jones, if you know the name, Chair of Neuroscience and Education at the University of Bristol, Dorothy Bishop, who researches developmental neuropsychology at the University of Oxford, as well as Stephen Pinker, have all signed a letter opposing this neuromyth and calling for its abandonment. In particular, they point to systematic studies that found little or no evidence that supports the hypothesis that meshing or formatting material to individual learning styles is more effective for educational attainment. So this article details how even as far back as 2012, or even as recent actually as 2012, 80% of teachers in the UK and the Netherlands, in this particular study, still believe that students learnt better as a result of such an individualised approach. And I think in another study it was even as high as 93%, with 76% saying that they use this in their teaching. However, what seems to be being argued is a disparity between practical research and scientific research, or perhaps teacher beliefs versus empirical evidence. In fact, one professor is so confident that scientific evidence can't prove that the benefits of learning styles exist, that he's offering a personal reward of $5,000 for anyone who can bring this research and claim that it's a thing. And this has gone up. This has gone up from $1,000 in 2006. So I'm not sure what that's showing. That he's even more like, as the years have gone on, he's like, come on, do your best research at me, or let me listen to your research. I don't know.
There's someone in the wings who's got the research just waiting for that to go up to 1 million.
And last month in October, this is more recent actually. Carol Lafferby, who is an ELT consultant, author and teacher, wrote on a British Council article giving 4 reasons to avoid learning styles. So she claimed that firstly, it doesn't make any sense from a pedagogical perspective or a neuroscience perspective. Secondly, that the sensory modalities are inconsistent. And thirdly, there is no evidence that it improves learning. And additionally, they think that this has been hijacked by business interests. So there's a lot of businesses developing assessment instruments around what learning style suits you, etc. That kind of thing. So that's an overview of kind of what's been talked about recently. It's been going on for years, obviously. But what are your thoughts on this and experiences with learning styles? Do you have one? Do you use them in your class?
It was interesting to me, the point about most teachers believing it, because I remember on my CELTA and my TEFL, that in both of them you actually had to include in the lesson plan how you were integrating learning styles.
So I should make clear that the original article was not just related to language teaching, it's related to education in general. But there was that. I was going to say that actually that came up for me too. That there was a focus on, like, for my DIP TESOL, we had to include a report of class member learning styles that we just crudely took. Oh, she's probably a kinesthetic learner.
He moves around a lot.
He's on his iPhone. He's probably
that kind of thing. And we had to actually we did our own learning style assessment things, and this was back in 2012. I also remember, like, it's not learning styles, but a similar thing. If you had a brain gym, it was a very popular thing,
like a Nintendo game or something.
No, it was something you do in your class with your learners. It's basically the idea was, like, before your classes you do these kinds of movements which are meant to connect the energetic sources of energy in your body, the kinetic batteries and stuff. And it's kids moving their arms around and lying down and making, touching their fingers together, and that makes the energy connect through their heart and that kind of thing, right? And I read about this in Ben Goldacre's book, Bad Science, where he kind of says this is just complete nonsense. And then a friend of mine who's a teacher, like several years later, said, "Oh yeah, we do that every morning," and just never questioned it. And so I can completely understand and believe that most teachers do believe this kind of thing.
I can believe that most teachers, like that you gave the 80% figure or sometimes higher.
In particular studies.
What I don't believe is the 76% number saying that they actually use it in their teaching.
Well, it depends what you mean by use it.
I'd say
I include pictures in my worksheets for the visual learners.
I think if you, I'd
but
imagine,
but I think they would have included pictures anyway.
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I'm saying.
I'd imagine they would have got this research through questionnaires. Or maybe through an interview, perhaps. And at some point, a teacher probably would have said, "Well, I cater for these particular types."
But I think even the teachers who believe in it, and I I certainly believe that at the time or whenever it was done, most teachers did, because as you say, it was included on Celta and Delta courses.
Yeah,
I think a lot of teachers, even if they did, they used it in their classrooms, they probably gave up after a little while.
Yeah, so there is definitely, you can see why teachers in our field may have that inclination, I think. And not like the dip test or, like Rob said, we had to talk about learning styles as part of the grading criteria.
Yeah, we had to show how you'd cater to different learning styles in your plan. Although, I wonder, this might be a slightly off-topic thing, but,
sure.
Sorry. But I wonder if it's, in that sense, if it was necessarily bad, because when I actually did the lessons, when I said I'm catering to kinesthetic learners, what I meant was I'm just getting them to stand up and change seats. And that probably, if nothing else, it just wakes the students up a bit. I'm including attractive pictures for the visual learners.
Well, that would, like, most discussions I had in staff rooms about learning styles, the conclusion was always, so there's a bunch of different learning styles. If you believed it, there's a bunch of different learning styles in the classroom, so just do a bit of everything, which as a result is not a bad thing.
So then the argument is more about modality and variation, but you're not actually catering for the students. You're just kind of mixing it up and keeping it fun. That's okay. If you get behind that, that's all right.
I guess the danger, I suppose, would be is if you separated all the students into different learning styles and said, okay, you're going to do the activity this way, which again might not be that bad, to be honest, if they all get a chance to do everything. But.
Now, what about James Dean Brown?
Mm-hmm.
So when we interviewed him, and maybe even the workshop we saw before we interviewed him at JALT, he talked about his son.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember this?
Yeah.
The musician.
Yeah, his son, the musician. And he said, like, his son, when he was learning, I can't remember, was it kanji or English or something like that? He had all of these kind of flashcards. He was and he couldn't learn them. He just couldn't learn them. Couldn't get them into his head. So he recorded all of these things for him and made him listen to them. And he said, and suddenly it clicked, and he could remember every word because he was an audio. What's it called?
Auditory learner.
An auditory learner. Yeah. And so he had this very strong statement about he really believed in learning styles because that happened for his son.
Yeah. On my MA course and the language course on language learning strategies, we were asked to try out a bunch of different methods of memorizing a list of 10 vocabulary items, and then kind of report on which one worked best for us.
Yeah.
And we all had, as far as I remember, we had different ones that worked best for us. Like one was, like you said, like listening to the words on my iPod, like every day when I went to school. One was writing them down.
Yeah.
But I don't think it had anything to do with my learning style, to be honest.
I think maybe
there's other factors involved. Basically.
Yeah, and is the learning style something that's meant to be inherent, or is it something you develop? I mean, like, I spend a lot of time reading, so I tend to pick up, I feel, more information from reading. Whereas, as we mentioned when we talked about podcasts, when I listen to podcasts, I don't actually absorb that much from them. Yeah. They sort of wash over me.
Well, so I'm not quite sure. So a lot of these people are coming at it from the scientific field of they want to collect evidence for educational attainment, but I mean that's limited as well. I mean, what is attainment? Are we talking about higher grades? Are we talking about language? I mean, if we're talking about language learning, are we going to focus on how many vocabulary items they remembered? Because I'm sure there's research being done on that, but I don't think on the scientific scale that they want.
Yeah, I mean, generally, I'm happy to say that learning styles are a myth and they aren't scientifically supported. But that doesn't mean that every learner is exactly the same. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that making use of learning styles in terms of incorporating lots of different things into your lessons is necessarily negative.
Right.
The only problem would be is if you try to, pigeonhole your students.
What I'd also say is there's nothing wrong with your localized classroom setting, and if students feel more comfortable with a certain approach, that be sensitive to that. But I think I agree when there's you can't say because this will lead to better results. But I think it's enough to say that for my given setting, I'm working with the students, and that's kind of enough, I think.
But then, I mean, if we're talking about things like training courses,
right,
there's a limit to what you can do with your own anecdotal kind of experience.
Yeah.
I think promoting this kind of thing on training courses is bad, but I think you could very easily get the same positive benefits by just saying, make sure you get the students to stand up and move around, make your materials attractive, you know?
Yeah, so this made me, and maybe we won't have time to get into this, but this made me think of your argument that you raised like a few episodes back about the research and the teacher, and maybe this is kind of an example of when these should be speaking to one another.
Yeah, well, I think it's an example where they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure there was a lot. I mean, if that many people from the University of Bristol and Oxford signed their names on this, I imagine it was a fairly extensive bit of research.
Yeah.
In terms of like educational outcomes.
Sure. Yeah.
But who knows? Maybe in 10 years we'll have another bit of research which says the opposite.
That's just how science works.
Okay, so that's today's TEFL culture, the neuromyth, I guess, of learning styles.
TEFL pioneers.
This episode's TEFL pioneer is King George VI.
Okay.
I knew it.
Our first royal.
For it was he
blue-blooded
who granted the British Council a royal charter way back in 1940, 6 years after it started. So actually, I'm not going to talk about King George VI. I'm going to talk about the British Council.
Right.
That's all right.
That's fine.
The Council is a pioneering organization.
A plural
that
one,
way.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so first, a little bit of history of the British Council. Do you know what year it started?
1940?
Nope.
1936?
Almost. 1934.
Okay.
Some British Foreign Office officials created the British Committee for Relations with Other Countries. They did this to support English education abroad, to promote British culture, and to fight the rise of fascism.
That's pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then the war started, so what a load of good they
Well, 5 years later. They held it off for 5 years. Yes. Yeah. What I'm not sure is if that's the order of their priorities.
Yeah.
If the fight against the rise of fascism was
They just
top of the
tagged that
list.
on at the end.
Right,
Like the
maybe.
king nut of fascism.
So the name quickly changed from the British Committee for Relations with Other Countries to the British Council for Relations with Other Countries. And then in 1936, 2 years later, it was officially shortened to the British Council.
Okay.
So in a sense, you're right.
Right.
In another sense, you're still wrong.
In the main sense.
In 1938, the council opened its first 4 offices abroad, in Bucharest, Romania, Cairo, Egypt, Lisbon, Portugal, and Warsaw, Poland. The Portugal offices are the oldest and continuous operation in the world. So the ones they opened back then are still going. So in 1940, as I mentioned, King George VI, who I guess wasn't king for long at that point.
Or for long after that point.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean.
Was he wasn't the one that abdicated, was he?
No, that was Edward VII.
Yeah.
His brother or son?
Something.
Something like that. It's very recent history.
No, it was his brother.
Okay.
It was his brother.
Yeah, it was his brother, then he became king.
Right.
Yeah, Edward VII abdicated, so then George became king.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And then his daughter, Liz, became queen.
And we all know what happened to her.
Yes, that's right. Do we? So, the granting of a royal charter basically meant the British Council became a fully functioning organization that could, buy and sell things, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
And its remit at the time was to promote a wider knowledge of the United Kingdom and the English language abroad, and to develop closer cultural relations between the UK and other countries. So it's always had this element of promoting the language from the beginning. I'm going to read out the official original aim of the organization from an extract from the 1940 annual report. The Council's aim is to create in a country overseas a basis of friendly knowledge and understanding of the people of this country, of their philosophy and way of life, which will lead to a sympathetic appreciation of British foreign policy, whatever for the moment that policy may be, and from whatever political conviction it may spring. While in times of danger, this friendly knowledge and understanding becomes vital to the successful prosecution of war. That is the Council's place in the war effort. In times of peace, it is not less valuable.
It's kind of soft power.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, I can see where this will play into the argument that Robert Phillipson made in the 1990s about the British Council.
Right, yeah, maybe we can touch on that as well. So this idea that the British Council wants to basically maintain friendly relations with other countries through like soft power, through an understanding of culture, but also philosophy and way of life. I thought it was interesting that they talk about the British foreign policy, whatever it may be at that moment,
right,
and whatever political conviction it may spring from. Which sounds to me like the British Council is meant to reflect whatever the current government is promoting in terms of foreign policy.
Right.
That was in 1940. Do you think the British Council still does that, or do you feel like they're quite independent from whatever the current administration is?
Very recently they've started to talk about scaling back their operations overseas. So it seems like
they've been doing that for a while.
They're at the beck and call of the government. Well, they're reacting to the
in
government
terms of funding,
by reducing their.
Yeah.
But it's ultimately a quango, right? It's like a not-for-profit government-backed organisation.
I always thought that was kind of fruit.
What I believe a quango is. Right.
Yeah, I mean, the total income in 2014 for the council was £973 million.
That was through their language services, right? That's the only profit-making...
The language services are a separate thing, aren't they?
But they still make money for the...
Yeah, so 637
but they're not funded.
Of that. Yes. So they get 100... Well, in that year, they got 155 million granted aid from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. But 637 of that total 973 came from, teaching basically and examination services.
Right. So I wonder where the money goes. I wonder, does the money stay in the countries that they're in, or does it go back to the central British government? I wonder how they collect their money.
It goes back into the council, I guess. I mean, the teaching and examination stuff does, yeah.
Right.
I mean, the idea is that they're spreading soft power, which will later on filter back in forms of, I guess, revenue or in some form.
Yeah.
When I was working in London, they organised a lot of teacher training kind of seminars or programs that you could do. So I used to go to those I think they may have moved their main office. I think they're near Trafalgar Square.
Right.
I feel like I used to go to one near Victoria. I'm not sure. But yeah, partly maybe because of the venue, because it felt like an old stuffy house. There was obvious money there, which maybe lent it an air of professionalism.
Right.
The actual teacher training things I went to were pretty mixed in terms of how they were actually run. So maybe we can then talk a little bit about whether or not we think the British Council needs to exist as a thing. So I mean, the whole idea of an organization like this representing one country and then opening offices all around the world to promote its own culture with the noble aim of maintaining good relations with that country. Do you think that's something that we still need to have in this day and age?
All countries have it, right? Like France has one. France has a very...
Alliance Française.
Germany has one.
The Goethe Institute.
And I'm pretty sure Japan has the Japan Institute. They have
linked with their embassies.
They have one in New York, I think, and they have one in London.
China has the Confucius Institutes.
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
So I think they're good sort of satellites to have. They raise understanding of cultures, right?
But I'm not sure how much they do. I can only really talk about the British Council, but I'm not convinced that it does very much of that. And I think it's the goals that you laid out before. It's clearly not just about cultural understanding. It's about spreading a certain form of soft power, as you mentioned, Matt.
Cool Britannia.
Yeah, and I think in that sense, it's you could almost read it as a kind of a propagandistic thing. Like when they're spreading British culture, they're spreading certain messages about British culture, which may not be completely accurate. They're obviously a bit rose tinted, or they're focusing on the things that they feel the country should be proud of, and that kind of thing. So it's not so much about understanding as promoting a particular image of the country for particular political ends. I would argue.
Right. That's it's a fair point. If it is purely this kind of cultural understanding, then you would want to talk about everything about that culture, presumably.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think actually, as a language teaching institute, I'm in favour of it.
Why?
Because I think that, I think there are lots of problems with it, I'll say that. I think there are lots of problems with it. And I agree with, as I mentioned, Phillipson's criticism of it in terms of it, being used as a kind of a soft power through English teaching thing. But I think that it does some good in terms of having a standard that other schools try to meet to an extent. And again, I think that standard, you can question that standard in certain ways, but I think having something there that people can kind of aspire to is in a way good.
Okay.
So the BBC, for example, is a very inward-looking organisation. Like they're very self-critical and they're very openly self-critical of their practices, or more so recently.
Right.
Do you think the British Council should display that of our country? Do you think that they should also stand as a beacon of kind of self-criticism?
I don't want to be like a Stalinist.
I imagine just by being British, there's probably, more of an element of self-criticism or self-depredation.
Yeah.
Then, for example, if the United States had a similar organization.
Do they not?
Not that I know of. I think it's just Hollywood movies and Coca-Cola and Blue Jeans. Like they just let their exports do that job for them.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'd like to know, in terms of materials, teaching, because the British Council does make a lot of its own teaching materials. Yeah. And I know that there are people that work in the head office in London that produce these materials. But I'm wondering if there's ever any kind of discussion that goes on about the type of image that they want to, or at a government level.
If in the materials, you mean?
Yeah. It'd be interesting to find that out. Because there is... You could say there's an agenda, but you could say that about everything if you really looked at it.
Sure.
But I wonder if there is an agenda.
I imagine there probably is, but who knows?
I think one very good thing they do is, in the UK, they're active in terms of overseeing all language schools.
Yes.
So every school has to be accredited by the British Council.
Yeah, which again, I think that's a kind of a positive thing. I think accreditation in general is positive. So, yeah. Okay,
so we'll call them a pioneer.
Yeah.
Because of their various activities in the field of language teaching. That's King George VI's British Council.
Thank you for listening to this episode.
And if you'd like to follow us on Twitter, you can do so at TEFLology. You can like us on Facebook if you wish. You can look at our website, TEFLology-podcast.com. You'll find all of our previous episodes there, and also information about our new ebook, which we may have mentioned in the past. Don't forget, please rate and review us on iTunes or any other kind of download. What are you saying there?
Email.
Okay. Don't forget you can rate or review us on iTunes, and that really helps get this podcast to a wider audience. And feel free to email us at teflology@gmail.com with any questions, criticisms, or legal disputes, if you have any of those. Yeah. So it's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from me.
Goodbye.